Thank you, Amanda, very much for being with us here on France 24. We appreciate your time. And I wonder if you can express to us how you feel now that this resolution has been passed, but in this watered-down state.
It's absolutely extraordinary, the last-minute negotiations that led to the U.S. threatening to veto the resolution if it had any mention of health. And this is an extreme example of how the U.S. government under the Trump administration is trying to enforce its vision of women's rights that doesn't include sexual and reproductive health and rights. It's shocking to see this happen in the context of trying to protect survivors of sexual violence and conflict.
Let me just clarify that. This is Donald Trump and his entourage, their own vision of how things should be and how women's bodies should be controlled. I suppose that's the best way to put it, isn't it? Control, because that's what it is, as opposed to looking at how this can prevent this problem of rape in war zones can be prevented.
Absolutely. They are focused more on trying to enforce their vision of, exactly as you said, women's bodies being controlled, than ensuring that women who have survived being raped in war can have access to everything that they need to be able to move on with their life. Everything from access to comprehensive sexual health education, sexual health to mental health, anything that they need. That whole health section was stripped out of this resolution in order for it to pass.
Amanda, we heard Amal Clooney, the lawyer who represents Nadia Murad, who was the Yazidi woman who was held as a sex slave by ISIS. We heard Amal Clooney calling for prosecutions to be held, and one perhaps thinks that those kind of prosecutions may perhaps not happen. Can you give us some idea of the scale of this problem? Because obviously we can talk about the ISIS issue with the Yazidi women, but this goes on in conflict zones around the world, doesn't it?
Yeah, sexual violence in conflict and the disparate ways that women and girls experience violence in conflict is something that over 20 years the world has actually tried to pay attention to, tried to address. And we've been increasingly seeing accountability for this type of crime, and yet this resolution signals a real backing away of a movement towards holding people accountable for this type of crime. It's really such a pervasive form of violence against women, sexual violence in conflict, rape in war, and to have there be backtracking on this is really, it's unspeakable.
The US, obviously, you mentioned the US role, the Trump administration, but Russia and China too vetoing it.
There was a lot of discussion about a formal mechanism in order to hold perpetrators of this type of violence accountable. And really, China and Russia showing that they're willing to veto a resolution to move forward protections for sexual violence in conflict is just really, or for survivors, is really a demonstration of how women's rights globally are put on the chopping block for political gain.
And that is a disgrace, and I can sense that in your voice, and I completely agree with you. We're reporting about the situation in Sudan right now, where women are calling for, to be treated as humans, because they're saying they're not. And in so many countries, that is the case. Women are treated as if they are not equal to men, and certainly sometimes as if they are subhuman, and that is an absolute disgrace. How can we hope, and I'm saying we because I think we agree completely, how can we hope to stop this problem of rape as a weapon when there's that kind of attitude towards women worldwide?
So this agenda, the Women, Peace and Security agenda that the UN Security Council was actually voting on today, but it's a continuation of over 20 years of work to increase the participation of women in politics, political participation of women, and also to increase women's participation in peacemaking. Oftentimes, women are left out of the peacemaking process, and so all the recovery after conflict is really from the perspective of men. So one of the most important things, in addition to addressing sexual violence in conflict, is to bring women into the room of peace negotiations and into the governments that are formed after conflict. Women need to be able to speak for themselves, to make laws as full members of society. And once women are in the chambers of power, you'll start to see a shift in how laws respect women.
Well, let's hope that shift comes soon. Amanda Classing from Human Rights Watch, co-director of the Women's Rights Division. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts about the resolution passed at the UN Security Council.